Islandora WestVault automates the preservation of your objects in Copal's Westvault Locks network. Locks means lots of copies keep stuff safe. To use Islandora WestVault, you first need a WestVault account. If you're a BCELN member, contact the Admin Center to help you get started. If you're a Copal member, talk to Copal. This module will also work though if you have any other OwnCloud based preservation tools, so if you do, you can keep watching. Once you have an account, you'll need to enable the Islandora WestVault module. So go to Modules and find WestVault. It also depends on a couple of other modules that you'll need to make sure are installed. That's Islandora Bagit, Islandora Bagit Complex, and Islandora WestVault Extras. For those modules that are not core, there will be links in the video description. Once everything is enabled, you'll want to go to the permissions page to make sure that you actually have permission to use Islandora WestVault. Make sure you're checked off, along with any other roles that you want to grant this permission to. Keep the administrator privilege very restricted because passwords are involved. And finally, you're ready to get started. To begin, open the Islandora WestVault configuration page under Islandora, Islandora Utility Modules, Islandora WestVault Preservation. This is where you're going to see all of the different configuration options. But before we get into those, in a separate tab, you'll want to log into your WestVault account at deposit.copal.ca. This is where you're going to see all of the different WestVault controls and the files that are sent to WestVault, etc. Let's start by clicking the Files header at the top and click WestVault. Here are all the files that have so far been sent to WestVault to the Locks network. Click the Settings link, and there's just one setting that you have to be concerned about changing. You want to make sure that the Remove Completed Deposits option is checked. This way, once your files have been sent to WestVault, they'll be cleared out of our local Islandora server. This will not remove your objects from Islandora, it just clears out the temporary storage where the copies that were made for preservation of your files were waiting to be sent here. If you don't do this, then they'll just stay in there and clutter up the server and take up space and eventually probably cause a crash. So once you're configured here, let's go back to Files and check out the directory list. There are two folders here that matter to you. There's Locks Preserved and there's Locks Restored. The Locks Preserved folder is synchronized to a folder on our server file system, which is where the preservation files are stored temporarily on their way here. The Locks Restored folder is where your objects go if you need to restore them from preservation in case of data loss or the world ending or what have you. If everything goes well, you will not actually need to interact with either of these folders. So let's get back to our module configuration, figure out what goes into every field. The OwnCloud local path is the directory on our server that will sync with your WestVault Locks Preserved folder. You don't need to worry about this. If you're an Arca member, then I will be the one setting it when everything else is done. So please don't change it after the fact. The default path OwnCloud or TMP/OwnCloud works if you are the only repository on your file system. The OwnCloud WebDAV URL, the default one, is probably the one you want. This URL tells the module which folder in your WestVault account to send the files to. If you recall, there are various directories here. The default is Locks Preserved, and that's the one that will actually be sent to WestVault proper. So don't change this unless you're trying to do test stuff, which you shouldn't need to do, unless you're me. In the test environment here, you'll see that I have test directory set up as the target. This means that any objects that I have marked for preservation don't end up in blocks. They do end up in OwnCloud, but they don't get synced with WestVault, and that's because I don't want to fill up our WestVault space with test temporary objects. The temporary file location, don't worry about this, it's fine, the default settings. The maximum file size in WestVault. This setting was created because of a bug in WestVault's implementation of OwnCloud, which is the software that interfaces between our server and the Locks network. Basically, it cannot send files larger than 2 gigabytes to the Locks network, at least not right now. Copal have been working on fixing this limitation, but for now we're stuck with it. So this setting tells the module not to bother creating the preservation file, the bags, and to log the problem in our Drupal logs. The object will still be flagged for preservation in case the problem is fixed in the future. So every time the job runs, it'll see this object, see, oh, it's bigger than 2 gigabytes. Let's leave it aside for now. But in future cron runs, if that number is changed, then it will work. The OwnCloud user ID and password, these are the credentials for your WestVault account. The system needs them in order to sync the local directory with the preservation directory in your WestVault account. The password field will appear blank after you fill it in and save it. And that's done deliberately for security. And the bolded text here will tell you whether or not the password is saved. Once Islandora WestVault's configured, you need to configure one more module to get things working. That's Islandora Bagit. So go to Islandora, Islandora Utility Modules, Islandora Bagit. This module creates bags, which are basically zip files containing your object's data streams and metadata. Bags are a standard format for preservation, and they're what gets sent to WestVault to preserve your objects. The main settings that you need to be concerned about are the collection batch type. This determines what kind of bag is generated if you create a bag for a collection. You have to choose the collection object only, children will not be bagged. The other options will either zip up the entire collection with all of the objects contained therein into a single bag, which will probably be too big for WestVault to actually process, or all of the child objects individually with no record of the collection itself. So if you choose any other setting than this, Islandora WestVault will refuse to operate and tell you to fix it. The other section is the object plugins. Bagit requires that you select at least one plugin in order to work. The most important one is Object DS Basic, which is the one checked here. That ensures that all of the object's data streams are included in the bag. You can pick other ones as well if you care about them, but the main thing is make sure DS Basic is selected. Under bag metadata, it's good to fill this out so that pertinent information about your organization and its relationship to the objects is not lost, so make sure you fill that out. And then there's complex objects. So Islandora WestVault expects specific configuration for complex objects. Complex objects means objects that have children, books, newspapers, compound objects, newspaper issues. This section determines whether or not the children of these complex objects also get bagged. Islandora WestVault requires that books and newspaper issues are checked, while newspapers and compound objects are not checked. This is so that pages of book and newspaper issue objects are bagged together when the parent object is bagged. For compound objects and newspapers, Islandora WestVault already deals with them by marking each of their children for preservation as independent objects, so we don't need to worry about them. So you're going to check off books and newspaper issues, leave the others unchecked. If your settings are any different, Islandora WestVault will refuse to run and complain at you to change your settings. Finally, there's Add Westvault Tags. Since Westvault has specific tags in the object metadata that their system requires, you should make sure that it's checked. Once everything is configured, you're going to contact the admin center, that is me. I will do the rest of the setup. The rest of this segment here explains how things work in the back end. It's sort of a peek under the hood that you will never have to touch. So feel free to zone out. If all you want to do is tell Islandora to preserve certain objects and set it and forget it, you will not need this information. And you'll come back in a moment. So when you've got everything configured, I will set up your OwnCloud directory in the server to one that is unique to your site. Then there are two extra bits that I have to set up. Cron Jobs. You see the list of cron jobs we have in Arca here. A cron job is a task that the server performs automatically at some specified regular interval. Sorry. As you can see here, I've got the Arca Twitter bot set up to run every hour, every day. The rest of these are Westvault ones. For Islandora WestVault, there are two drush commands that need to be run in order to extract your objects and sync them to Westvault. There's Westvault Bagit and Westvault Sync. Westvault Bagit does a few things. It generates a list of all the objects that have been marked for preservation. It eliminates from that list any objects that have already been preserved and sent to Westvault. And then it creates a bag for each remaining object. Then analyzes the bag to make sure it contains everything it's supposed to. Then if the bag validates all the checks, it gets sent to the OwnCloud directory to await syncing, and the object in Drupal, in Islandora, is marked preserved. If there's a problem with the bag that's produced, the bag is deleted, the problem is recorded in the logs, and the object remains in queue for preservation while you have time to fix it. Then, once all that's done, at some other time in the day, the Westvault sync command synchronizes the OwnCloud directory with your remote Westcloud or Westvault locks preserved directory. Any files therein will be sent off to OwnCloud. There they will sit in the locks preserved folder until Westvault's own cron job sends them off to the locks network. Once they're sent off, the files are removed from the locks preserved folder, and the next time Westvault Sync is run, the bags that have already been sent there will also be removed from our server. Now, if you've zoned out during the last section, you can come back. This is where we go over how to mark objects for preservation. It's really quite simple. So if you want to preserve an individual object, you'll navigate to that object, click the Manage button, find the Preservation tab, and check off the Preserve this object box, and save. And that's it. You see preservation data created to let you know that it happened and that it worked. What this does is, if you look at the Data Streams tab, it creates a new data stream on the object called Preservation, labeled Westvault Preservation Data. This data stream contains metadata about the object's preservation status, which you'll see if you click onto it. It's just some very simple XML. Initially, it has a date preserved timestamp indicating precisely when you marked it and created this data stream. When the automated Westvault Bagit command runs, it will find this object along with any other objects that have a preservation data stream. It will analyze the data stream to make sure it hasn't already been preserved, and then it will create bags for them. Once the object has been tagged, the preservation data stream is updated, and a new tag is created called Confirm Preserved with a date stamp. This hides it from any subsequent Westvault Bagit commands, ensuring that it won't be preserved more than once and won't fill up your storage space. If you marked an object for preservation by accident, you can undo it. Just go back to that Preservation tab and uncheck the box and save. This will delete the preservation data stream. So if you go to data streams, you'll see that there is no more preservation data stream. If the object has not already been preserved, that is, the cron job hasn't run since you flagged it, doing this will stop that from happening. If it has already been preserved, doing this will erase the record of it being preserved. So it's ever marked for preservation another time, it will be bagged and sent to WestVault again. So you'll have another copy of this object in WestVault. This is something you might want to do if you have made substantial changes to the object. Just know that it means you will end up with two copies. Now, if you want to preserve multiple objects at once, that is, objects that are the parents of other objects, like books, newspapers, collections, compound objects, there are a few neat tricks with these. If you want to preserve a collection, you can manage it and go to the Preservation tab, as usual. But you'll notice on collections there's a new option that says Apply Preservation Policy to. You can choose to make the collection behave in different ways. You can preserve the collection object itself and any new children, not the current children. That excludes current children. You can preserve the collection object itself along with all of its children and any new children that come in the future. Or you can preserve the collection object and its current children only, meaning that new objects that are added to the collection will not get marked for preservation. So let's preserve it. And you'll see there are 3 preservation data created notes here because there's the collection object itself and the current 2 children. The choice you make about how to apply your preservation policy gets written to the preservation data stream, where it says preservation method, and here it's all children. So this gets checked anytime a new object is added to this collection. If you selected an object that preserves the current children, as I said, a new preservation data stream is created for every child object that doesn't already have one. If it does already have one, then it gets skipped in this process. If you selected one that applies to new children, then any new child of this collection will also get a new preservation data stream, as if it doesn't already have one, as soon as it is either ingested to the collection, shared with the collection, or migrated into the collection from somewhere else. Then, on a collection, if you uncheck the Preserve This Object box, the collection's preservation data stream is deleted. But you'll see only one removed note. All of the children are left untouched. This is on purpose because we can't predict how you're going to want to deal with your child objects after you unpreserve a collection. You have to figure that out on your own. Another type of complex object is newspapers. So you can choose to preserve individual newspaper issues the normal way. If you click into the newspaper issue, manage it, and preserve it there, or you can preserve a whole newspaper at once. To preserve a newspaper, manage, preservation, and check the box. You'll see there are no special settings here for that. Once you do that, a preservation data stream will be created for the newspaper object as well as for all of the newspaper issues associated with it. You see this newspaper has 3 objects total. There's the newspaper and there's the 2 issues. You'll notice that the pages of the newspapers individually were not flagged. That's because Islandora WestVault processes the newspaper pages as part of the newspaper issue. So the pages aren't preserved individually, they're preserved as a group. The other one is compound objects. So if you mark a compound object, that is the parent, make sure you manage parent, for preservation, it will do the same to all of the child objects and any new objects that are later made its children. As with collections and newspapers, then, unchecking that box will delete the compound objects preservation data stream, but it will leave the children's preservation status unchanged. I believe that this object's children were already marked for preservation. Yeah, and that's why you didn't see the multiple notices. Finally, books and newspaper issues, as I mentioned, the preservation for their pages is taken care of by the Islandora Bagot module rather than by Islandora WestVault, so you can treat them just like any other objects. However, it is wise, if possible, to make sure that your newspaper issues are complete before you mark them for preservation. There we go. Because any pages, the pages, as I said, are bundled together in the bag. So any new pages you add to the issue aren't going to be preserved separately unless you manage the pages and tag them for preservation separately. But then they won't be part of the bag that contains them, or that contains all the other pages related to that issue. So once everything is marked for preservation, then all you have to do is wait. And every day or week or whatever setting is set up in Cron, at a certain time, the commands will run, your objects will be bagged up, sent to Westvault,